Hello, my name is Tahi Menelas, and I am a senior English and Inclusive Education major. It is my pleasure to present along with Holly, Caitlin, and Kaylee on the topic of resistance literature and its importance. In spring 2019, we took a course called Resistance Literature with Dr. Islam, and today we would like to share what we've learned from this course and how it has impacted us. To begin, we defined what resistance literature is. It is an outlet for authors to express their feelings, thoughts, and struggles while facing oppression. It is a form of writing used to discuss the resistance against social and political events during a specific time period. Some of these include discrimination of racial groups, social caste systems, and the indoctrination of religion from government control over a country. The stories we are presenting today showcase the common themes of oppression, exile, discrimination, whether social class or gender, as well as indoctrination from this definition. While reading all of these stories together, we realized how important it is to read this form of literature. Resistance literature gives a voice for the people who have been dealing with the socio-political hardships to share their story and how they overcame these matters. Why is reading resistance literature so important? It is important to learn about individuals who have been oppressed and haven't been traditionally listened by our own society. Readers learn how individuals face their own struggles under the power of resistance. Resistance literature gives a voice to the people who were not able to speak or write about their own lives. Therefore, resistance literature is a symbol and a way to release internal and external struggles from the author. The books we chose that represents this form of literature is Butterfly Burning, God of Small Things, Untouchables, and The Poetry of Resistance. I want to give you a little background of each book for my peers, and I use these texts to bring topics such as evil, suffering, giving marginalized people a voice under colonialism, and more. Butterfly Burning, written by Yvonne Vera, focuses on the developing relationship between two lovers named Fumbatha and Thethalafi in a township called Makakoba. The God of Small Things, written by Arundhati Roy, is about two twins named Rahel and Estafan remembering their childhood memories and how their family's behavior treated one another after the death of their cousin, Sophie. In Mulk Rand Anaj's story, Untouchables, he writes about a sweeper named Baka. As a sweeper, he is considered untouchable, which is the lowest level on the Indian caste system. Those who have this label are considered a disgrace in society. In this novel, Baka is challenging the Indian caste system by how discriminatory it is. The last book, Poetry of Resistance, is a collection of poems from multiple authors writing about the Zionist control over Palestine. Each author has a distinct title that addresses the themes of racial profiling and xenophobia, which will be explained more through our papers.
A common theme within resistance literature is the oppression faced by women who already belong to marginalized groups. Though this oppression shows itself in various forms, it is most blatantly exposed through the sexual exploitation of female characters. Unlike the societal standards their male peers must resist against, that are based off of things such as class, ethnicity, caste, or socioeconomic status, the women in these stories deal with all of those struggles on top of the dehumanization unique to their gender. Within the God of Small Things, Untouchable, and Butterfly Burning, we see a variety of strong female characters that must choose whether to resist or conform to female sexualization that is normalized and even encouraged in their patriarchal societies. While female resistance against sexual violence is a common topic within feminism today, the suffering of minority women, specifically those colonized by Europeans, is oftentimes disregarded due to the amplification of Eurocentric or white feminism. These three novels give voice to a group of women that are commonly crowded out of the conversation and shows how their resistance, or lack thereof, differs from character to character. Regardless of what route they take, these women emerge from their stories tragically hopeless against a system that depends on their degradation. Rather than respecting the women in their communities, the men in these novels view them as sexual objects for them to possess and abuse. This is problematic not only in the fact that it dehumanizes the women, but it also creates strained, unhealthy relationships between the male and female characters. In her article, Not an Indian Tradition, The Sexual Colonization of Native Peoples, Amanda Smith states that sexual violence is not simply a tool of patriarchy, but is also a tool of colonialism and racism. Then entire communities of color are the victims of sexual violence. The women are expected to forsake their own well-being for the comfort and pleasure of the men in their lives, while the men are only expected to pursue their own desires. This results in weakened bonds between the men and women, which allows colonizers to remain in power over the colonized. In Untouchable, after Sohini is sexually assaulted by a priest, her brother Baka reacts to this event with anger that is not necessarily caused by him feeling for the trauma his sister went through, but rather because he feels that something has been taken away from him. Baka undoubtedly cares for Sohini, but it's an objectifying care that results in him resenting the thought of her ever becoming intimate with her future husband, due to how he felt he would be losing something. This jump from being angry at her sexual assaulter to being angry at her future husband shows that Baka does not necessarily see a difference between consensual sex and rape. However sincere his intentions are, he problematically views his sister as something subhuman that will go from belonging to him to belonging to another man, rather than viewing her as a human that is capable of existing outside of male desire. Thus, not only the priest's assault of Sohini, but also her brother's response to the event both fall in line with the intent of colonizers to divide oppressed communities. This possessiveness is even more so prevalent in Butterfly Burning through the relationship of Fumbatha and Fefalafi. Fefalafi is beautiful, young, and free, and Fumbatha never wanted to let her go, even though they were strangers. This desire to have ownership over her never fades away, and in fact grows stronger the more of her he has. Such desire actually imposes itself on the goals Fefalafi has for her future. Fumbatha is in love with his idea of her, and feels threatened when she asserts an independence from who he wants her to be. His perceived control over Fefalafi is evident when she shares with him her dream of becoming a nurse, and he forbids it. Fumbatha is terrified of the idea that Fefalafi is growing independent from him, and assumes that he has the final say in what she does with her life. This causes Fefalafi to resent Fumbatha, especially after she becomes pregnant with his child. Rather than seeing the problematic nature of a society that forces women to rely on men, specifically by not allowing pregnant women to receive an education, Fefalafi blames Fumbatha for her situation. Male possessiveness in these novels is always rooted in men viewing women as inferior to themselves, which allows them to guiltlessly violate them. Thus, Smith states that, in patriarchal thinking, only a body that is pure can be violated. The rape of bodies that are considered inherently impure or dirty simply do not count. Although practically all women in these societies fall victim to sexual objectification at some point, the severity of it is much worse for those who have a lower social standing. By viewing women as subhuman, thus impure, the male characters are able to commit a wide range of crimes against them, even more so in situations where the women are also a part of a lower caste, class, or socioeconomic status. We see this dehumanization of women explicitly occur in Untouchable, where Sohini is sexually assaulted by a priest. When she resists against his advances, he immediately begins screaming that she has polluted him. Despite the fact that the priest is the one who initiated the assault, he and the temple attendees view him as the victim because of Sohini's caste level. Although Baka is initially horrified by his sister's assault, he soon forgets it, thus presenting the idea that sexual assault of low-caste women is insignificant. This harmful ideology is not a happenstance. Rather, it solidifies the social order that allows those in power to stay in power, whereas the oppressed are allowed no escape or social mobility. This belief that certain women are inherently impure, thus incapable of being violated, presents itself in The God of Small Things. Despite the fact that Amu is in a higher caste, well off, and attractive, she falls victim to this ideology more than once. Her husband's European employer fetishizes Indian women, as seen by a number of ragged, light-skinned children on the estate that he had bequeathed on tea pickers whom he fancied, and despite Amu's class standing, she still receives no respect from him. Again, in her situation with a police officer, she is viewed as impure and is even referred to as a prostitute due to her affair with Velutha, which allows the officer to assault her without remorse. The women in these novels must all make a choice when it comes to their objectification: resist or conform. While many women see little choice but to conform to their subhuman position in society, some resist against this in various ways. Ultimately, those who resist are punished for going against societal norms that profit off of their objectification, but whether they resist or conform, they all have similarly hopeless endings. This shows the inherent powerlessness women have within these oppressive societies, and regardless of whether they follow or fight against the status quo, they receive no reward. Rather than completely resisting against the oppression they face due to their gender, some of the women in Butterfly Burning have learned how to use this idea of male sexual needs to their financial advantage. They sell themselves not only to the colonizers, but even to their own men. Although this gives them some independence, at least financially, they are still not immune to sexual abuse. Zendile, who prostitutes herself in order to make a living, is still sexually dehumanized within her own relationship with Boyidi, who covers her mouth when her speaking gets in the way of him trying to have sex with her. When it comes to customers, she makes no distinctions between white men and black men, because although she is more devoted to the black men like Boyidi, she seems to realize that in the end, she is still just a sexual object to them. On the other hand, Fefalafi resists completely against societal standards, first by applying to become a nurse, and second by giving herself an abortion in an attempt to achieve her goal. Her rejection of society's expectations for her creates a wedge between her and Fumbatha, and ultimately leads her to committing suicide. The parallel of hopelessness between Zendile and Fefalafi shows that regardless of whether women conform or resist, they will suffer. Regardless of whether the women in these stories fight against the societal standards or conform to them, they all have similarly hopeless endings. Fefalafi ends her own life, Amu dies alone, and Sohini fades into the background of her brother's story. Unlike other forms of literature, these stories are not intended to offer a moral or a happy ending, but rather they present the reader with a dark reality of female oppression in colonized societies. This is an issue that must no longer be pushed to the side and ignored when discussing sexual violence against women within feminist groups, but rather we should study works like these to inspire positive action and change. We do not need to settle for unhappy endings like Sohini, Amu, and the other characters in these novels. Instead, we should give a voice to and empower the communities that, as a whole, suffer from the problematic patriarchal structures as a result of colonization.
Social entrapment regarding class and identity feels the need for individualized resistance. Throughout the world, societal pressure is created by those who govern and the governed. Thus, tensions and identity conflicts result from the continuous stigmatization of those that are seen to be superior to the underprivileged. This results in citizens coming to judge a person based on what their identity forces their life to be like. The novels Butterfly Burning by Yvonne Vera, Untouchable by Malk Raj Anand, and the poems of trans and genderqueer poetry and poetics, edited by T.C. Tolbert and Jim Trace Peterson, all reveal a correlation of significant themes and concepts. The stance of individual struggle and the societal pressure molds the type of literature crafted. Societal entrapment is composed of stigmas and the ostracization of those deemed unworthy to partake in the enjoyable aspects of normal middle-class life. In Butterfly Burning, Untouchable, and trans and genderqueer poetry and poetics, each character confronts social entrapment on the basis of their class standing and a lack of any personal sense of selfhood, ultimately leading to the resistance which becomes uniquely individualized. In each piece of literature, the lines throughout the stories connect to create a similar overall arching idea. Family drama, tensions, and complicated expectations on the behalf of the victim are present. Individuals are often forced to make decisions based on what their current circumstances are and what their future appears to be like when lacking social interaction. Social interaction allows for gratification to occur. When gratification is placed through shame, fear, and hatred, individuals often try to shrink away from what's happening to them. Oftentimes, characters try to discover who they are, as seen in Butterfly Burning. It's finding herself, that was it. Philadelphia wanted to be somebody, because there was a longing there, burning. A desire to fit in, and yet to find oneself at the same time is a common theme throughout each story. Hence, a strong link can be recognized in relation to the impacts of societal outlooks and standards on individuals. People such as the characters in novels can become primary victims who have been silenced in multitudes of ways over their lifespan. It is as if culture lacks empathy for those deemed unworthy of the joys life has to give. When one has been silenced and not given the opportunity to express their intellect, feelings of resentment and anger build up. Eventually, an individual or individuals have had enough of being mute and lash out in poetic symbols in regards to their hardships during their silence. Regarding each novel, complexity is present with the time period of colonization, its effects and issues with gender. A certain inexactness is apparent in regards to having one theme be present in each novel, due to the multiple overlapping tones and voices that can be heard. In Butterfly Burning, the main character is trapped in a society that discourages individuality and has specific expectations for those who are part of the community. One comes to understand throughout the text a struggle for self-approval and a desire for acceptance. The society in Africa appears to have preconceived notions and expectations for its inhabitants, especially those who are female. In regards to men, the hard physical labor they perform is not their own. It is summoned. The time is not theirs. It is seized. And in unguarded moments of hunger and surprise, they mistake their fate for fortune. In Makobaba, which is in Bulawayo, the colonizers trap the African citizens by forcing them off their land, leaving little room for the opportunity to allow one to use their talents and flourish. The poverty and crime in the story can correlate with other forms of violence and hard physical labor in different countries. Amidst the poverty, money-paying jobs are present for laying train tracks, and a certain sense of courage from within is needed when clinging to the city. In the city, hope guides travelers throughout the streets in the guise of the opportunity for one to move up the social ladder. The mixing of languages, the rubbing of accents, and collision of meanings soothes gaps from people who are coming from everywhere. The alluring illusion is, the only concreteness is the pavement, and that they cannot even walk on. Even the city, which appears to provide so much opportunity, comes to lack expressing ideas of equality and openness for those trying to better their lives. The desire to belong is dominant, along with the notion of finding where one is supposed to be. The community in the city throughout the novel Butterfly Burning happens to create a mentality that does not always accept those who are trying to find their sense of selfhood and discovery. In the star of the novel, Philadelphia meets Fumbata, who she tells, "You could give me another name. I do not mind being named by a stranger. I do not mind being renamed if it makes the present clearer," thus chuckling over her words. In all seriousness, the message of feeling alone and confused comes across clearly through her words. Philadelphia thus thinks having a man, as women are supposed to have, will solve her lack of connection with another. As time tells, Philadelphia wants to pursue her own direction and dream of being a nurse, but ultimately comes face to face with obstacles and resistance. Women in the novel are seen to hold the status of being prostitutes versus using their skills to hold a job down. Zendali, who is a prostitute, uses her bite and womanly abilities to gather what she can of the histories of her men, murmuring something soothing, and at no cost at all, at no charge. She risks only the serenity of her own mind. Centering one's attention around others allows for a lack of significance towards one's own well-being to occur. It is ultimately a game and struggle of seducing men and disregarding other women's feelings by watching them disintegrate into ashes, versus coming together as females to advocate for their rights. The only way Philadelphia can resist, make her own choices using her freedom, is in her mind to take matters in her own hands. Not only does pressure play a key role, also one's awareness of their lack to assimilate creates the urge to address the matter at hand. A recognition of one's X, Y, and Z books, or better understood as chromosomes, highlights on the significance of different perspectives for one's story, and how through telling stories they discover that more similar book stories are present too. Reflecting on the circumstances one faces really allows them to develop a sense of who they feel they are, what an individual feels they lack in quality-wise, and what they flourish in for traits that express themselves is also significant. Exploring possibilities that are hidden, words that have been lost in dark edges, along with emerging societal paths of personal narratives is extremely enriching. Oftentimes, such ideas correlate with how society does not enjoy addressing topics that are uncomfortable. It is important to go outside ourselves and others' communities to see connections that seek out new ways of connecting with others. Only through understanding the structure of one's world and their attitudes towards it does one discover any desire for change. Resistance for both transgender and queer individuals entails their attempt to resist societal pressures by breaking away from the chains that eradicate their uniqueness and freedom to express themselves. Those who desire to express how they feel about themselves and their sexuality come to understand how things seen from the corner of the eye occasionally indicates a wider haunting. Those who have felt they have been left in the corner are making it known of their struggle by haunting those who have put them under such a situation. By standing strong against others who hate what they represent, seeing oneself other than as a formless form situated in social shame is enriching. Through gained selfhood and the acceptance of following one's desires over the community's, only then does an individual discover that they are on the correct path. When one is trapped in a society that allows little to no social mobility, the people come to seek their desires in other forms. Thus, the longing for one's struggle to be addressed is seen when individuals take arms and resist struggles in their own way. Resistance is in their thoughts, actions, literature, and own ideas. Entrapment is in the character's lack of challenging social order, class, or identity expectations. Metaphorically, each oppressed individual has its tail between its legs, identifying its repetitive desolations. Philadelphia and Baca, along with other characters in both novels, and the generalization of transgender and queer individuals, all express different forms of social entrapment, an awakening of realization by listening to their own voices. Overall, it is significant to reflect on the impact between people and society, especially with how society stifles individuality and how an individual retaliates back to that oppression.
For my paper, I titled it How Identity and Trying to Find One's Identity is a Form of Evil and Suffering Through Resistance Literature. I focused on this because throughout the course learning the aspects of resistance and exile literature, evil and suffering controls one's identity, whether it is mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. However, when reading stories such as Butterfly Burning, The Untouchables, Poetry of Resistance, and The God of Small Things, readers can see how poverty, death, and human rights could make one question, what is evil and suffering? Why does it exist? Through an article I found on Huffington Post called Why Do Evil and Suffering Exist by Jeffrey Small, he explains how many religions try to find the answer as to why evil and suffering occurs in society. Small writes, as difficult as this problem of evil and suffering is for religion to tackle, science gives us a different perspective. Scientists offer an even more definitive conclusion. For life to exist, pain, suffering, and death are not just inevitable, but necessary requirements. Every carbon atom that makes up the human body originated billions of years ago in a star whose violent explosion in a supernova created the heavier elements that are the building blocks of life. Evolution only works because of freedom in the natural world, a freedom of genetic mutation, a freedom of natural selection, and a freedom of randomness. Through freedom in the natural world, each character in their novels have the freedom to choose their identity and their own destiny. However, within the situations they are landed in, they express their difficulty to make the free choices they want to because of how the evil and suffering in their society and their lives suppress them. Fefalafi getting into the nursing program can be seen as a chance for her to uplift herself from poverty. But having a child with a man who cheated on her sets her back. With all these evils and suffering in her environment, she uncovers the truth about her murdered mother. She takes the form of her own resistance by fulfilling an abortion by herself and then setting herself on fire. Vera writes, the pain is more than she imagines. It is cutting. She holds it in her elbows, which she pushes into the ground behind her. She has to place the pain somewhere away from her own body, somewhere else. Vera also writes, she is lightning, burning like it. She is fire and flame, she is light. Fefalafi gains her own freedom and independence through this situation as a form of not only claiming her identity, but as a way of surviving the situations she has dealt with. Her evil and suffering has caused her to think that an abortion and committing suicide was the only way to make it out. Unlike Fefalafi, Sohini, who is Baka's sister from The Untouchables, continues to deal with the evil and suffering after her sexual assault, which hinders her in a way because she needs to find her identity as well. Due to the fact that Sohini was a beautiful girl but in a lower caste setting, it led her to be sexually assaulted. Sohini was not able to have a voice nor resist. She was so used to her brother trying to protect her. Sohini was unable to have an identity because she never claimed to make one of her own due to societal pressures. In addition, she was so used to a male figure taking care of her while doing her job, she never created a name for herself out of fear. A poem I chose from the Poetry of Resistance that discusses identity and evil and suffering is Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish. Darwish uses persona to portray Palestinians' reaction to exclusion from government to control the Palestinian people. Those who had these identity cards were not allowed to use streets, be in cities, shop in stores, and even more. He repeats the phrase, write down I am Arab, in the beginning of each of the stanzas. Not only does this show what the government people did to them under their occupation, but it also shows Darwish identifying himself as an Arab amidst the evil and suffering that is yet to approach. In the third stanza of Identity Card, readers view this stanza as a history of where Darwish's roots began. From lines 6 to 13, he writes, my roots sink deep before the birth of time, and before the beginning of the ages, before the time of the cypress and olives, before the beginnings of grass. My father belonged to the family of the plough, and was not of the grand stock. My grandfather was a farmer. Without a pedigree, he taught me the grandeur of the sun. Darwish identifies with where his family came from and with what his grandfather taught him. Then, to conclude his last stanza, he claims to say, I am a name without a title. In the last two stanzas of his poem, he talks about how the military took all of his land that he has identified with. He claims to have nothing left. Within the fourth stanza, he writes, I have been robbed of my ancestral vines, and the piece of land I used to farm with all my children, nothing remained for us, and for my grandchildren except these rocks. Therefore, at the end of Darwish's poem, He expresses the readers to beware of his hunger and fury towards the occupation. Not only is this a form of exile literature, but it portrays how his identity still remained the same during the poem. When the military occupation took over everything he identified with, he added anger within fury to not only survive, but to revolt against what was happening to his country. Things, we witness the loss of innocence in children, therefore a loss of youth and identity. A scene that portrays this is Sophie Mall's death, Astaphin and Rahel's cousin. They do not know what to make of it. They have never experienced death or the process of grieving one's death. In addition, they do not know the world could break men because after Sophie Mall's death was announced, the family dynamics and the behavior changed. For example, Roy writes, by then Astaphin and Rahel had learned that the world had other ways of breaking men. They were already familiar with the smell, sick sweet, like old roses on a breeze. Therefore, their childhood is lost and they are used to drastic changes evil and suffering has caused their family to go through. Based on how society coexists with evil and suffering, no one can tell why it still happens. As humans, we have resulted into finding survival tactics, such as adding to our identity or changing due to our experiences with evil and suffering.
Luke. As little girls grow up, we fantasize about becoming mothers and wives as caring and efficient as our own. We play with our baby dolls, envisioning having our own children to take care of as we play house with our friends and siblings. But what if that was your only option in life with no means to change your life plan? In Yuvoni Vera's novel, Butterfly Burning, and Mahasweta Devi's short story, Breastgiver, the main characters, Fefalafi and Joshada, face this stereotypical dilemma. Fefalafi has been stuck in her role as a wife with no chance to break free of her role, while Joshada has forever been stuck in the role of a mother with no means of escaping, forever being sexualized by society for many years of childbearing, yet being looked at as a goddess figure. Both women had a chance to change their life and continue, but they decided to choose death over life. This defiant act that Fefalafi and Joshada committed was their way of freeing themselves and standing up to the incredibly sexist, patriarchal, and stereotypical society. For starters, one should look at the stereotypical qualities that society views women to have. The term femininity refers to the traits that women typically consist of, specifically the fact that they are gentle, sensitive, attractive, passive, submissive, and additionally have a low sexual appeal. These traits portrayed in women often make them appear devalued, leading to a lack of respect, significantly less compared to how high of a value and respect men are put to. Portrayals of women in literature like Fefalafi and Joshada are represented to the degree that they are just waiting for men to walk into their lives and control them. Men are built with an expectation that their female companion has a submissive quality in order to keep their wives in their dutiful roles for the entirety of their lives. Additionally, as critic Danielle Bergeron argues, women expect to have desire for a masculine figure to come along and take their virginity away. She says today's women authors, physicians, artists, and others testify to how, relying on the letter of the body, where the Joshuans of the real is excluded but returns, they have taken it upon themselves to produce an original object of desire that sustains social life. From this, men see women to solely fulfill their sexual pleasure without taking into account who the woman is as a person. It seems that a woman's body is a man's desire, and sexual relations with women are the only thing that attract men. If women want to be seen as desirable to men, they have to keep up with their image of innocence and submissive front so that men are able to come along and control them, taking any bit of self-control that they have left for themselves. Women are not supposed to be intelligent or have a mind of their own because they are expected to be innocent and numb to the world around them. Julia Wood explains the misrepresentation of women as dramatically underrepresented. She claims that women are depicted as passive, dependent on men, and enmeshed in relationships and housework, which can be seen in many stories with female characters. It appears that in almost every literary piece, something is lacking in females, and as a result, women are not only subordinate, but in general quite satisfied with their position. As we will see, Fefalafi and Joshada are represented as passive characters who are fully committed to their roles, but as time goes on, they make tremendous decisions in order to end their lives, but defy their stereotypical roles. The first story we truly see this stereotypical sexism come into play is with the character Fefalafi in Butterfly Burning. Fefalafi is a quiet young woman who is married to her older husband, Fumbatha. The reader can see at first Phephilophe truly does love her place in her role and her husband, but it was her blind love that led Phephilophe to defy the societal norms and make her own choices. At first, Fumbatha seems to love Phephilophe extensively to the point where he wanted to protect her from the outside world. The narrator says he thinks deeply of Phephilophe. He must keep her close, somehow, all the time. He must make her belong. In other words, he does not want her to leave her role as a wife. If he were to let her leave and make her own choices, she would not belong to him anymore. This love he professes here is similar to possession, as if Phephilophe were a prize or an object that he did not want to let go for the fear of losing her. She would make him happy by being his wife and being obedient as he wants her to be. Additionally, he never says here that he loves Phephilophe for who she is as a person, just that he thinks about her deeply. In this statement, he may only be referring to his sexual desires for her, not necessarily the qualities that make up who she is. Going along with this statement, Phephilophe mentions that she wants to become a nurse at the hospital, and immediately Fumbatha says, "We are happy together. I work. I take care of you. It is not necessary for you to find something else." As mentioned before, Fumbatha does not want his wife to move out into the public sphere that he was in because women simply did not belong there. They should not be out in the real world finding a job or pursuing a dream. Phephilophe belongs in her house waiting for her husband to come home, making sure he is well taken care of, something that she has never experienced herself. He wants to do anything that would stop her from going out and getting a job because Fumbatha wonders if she will apply. Phephilophe wonders if he can stop her. There is a difference between love and possession. What these two share borders in the middle of these two concepts, seeing that Fumbatha treats Phephilophe like she is an object and never wants to let her go. Vera defines this as to have, the act of possession, this longing, that misery, this pressure, this neglect, this distress, that relief, this yearning, that command. Two key terms that can be taken away from this statement are misery and command. The possessive nature that Fumbatha directs onto his wife can be seen as very commanding in its nature, and as we will see, leads her into a misery that can only be solved by violence. One way she shows her violence is instead of letting her husband decide if she can go to nursing school, she makes the bold decision for herself. When it comes time for her to apply to the school, she ends up finding out that she is pregnant and has to decide between applying to be a nurse and having the baby. She does not tell Fumbatha of their child and decides to take matters into her own hands and performs her own abortion. She has no medicine and no one who can help her through it, only herself. She forces herself to push. She has pushed it, sharp and piercing, no fear, no excitement. This must be. In and out a watery sack. This young woman was not ready to make that choice for herself and did not want to go down a path of becoming a mother, something that was clearly meant for the roles of women in her time period. She outwardly defied the societal expectation by cutting the baby out of her, which is something that is still controversial in today's society. When Fumbatha finally finds out what she did to herself and the child, he grows angry at Phephilophe for keeping an enormous secret from him. Eventually, everything becomes suffocatingly too much for her, and she lights herself on fire as soon as Fumbatha walks through the doorstep one day. She is literally burning her reputation of a devoted wife to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes of who she used to be. Death is perhaps the most defiant act of all. She did not want her life anymore. She grew tired of the expectations she was expected to live up to that society labeled her as. This was her escape plan and the only way she was able to break out of her role as a woman. This may have been the one choice she was able to make her entire life, as violent and resilient as it may have been. Similar to the oppression that Phephilophe faced is Joshada's character in Breastgiver. In the very first paragraph of the story, we see where Joshada is in relation to society when it says, "It is as if she was Kangalicharn's wife from birth, the mother of 20 children, living or dead, counted on her fingers. As soon as she was born, she felt like she was born into the role of becoming a wife and mother, a severely stereotypical position to be in. If she felt like she was born into this role as a child, there truly must have been no other option for her or any of the women where she grew up, so being a mother was all she was ever seen as, a truly sexist position for the role of Joshada. Additionally, she is referred to here as Kangalicharn's wife, not as her own name, Joshada. This shows the patriarchal power that her husband had over her, a power so overbearing she could not even refer to herself with her own name. She even says to him, "Am I not your faithful wife?" Even after how she is being treated, which we will discuss a few pages down, she still remains as the dutiful wife and submissive wife, because that is all she is. She will never be anything more than his wife. She has a duty to provide and will listen to and please her husband along the way. In a way, bearing children is her own way of pleasing him. Additionally, Debbie writes that motherhood was always her way of living and keeping alive her world of countless beings. In this quotation, Joshada has taken motherhood as her own profession. Her husband referred to himself as a professional father, but it was Joshada's job to be a mother. A world of difference in the meaning of just 2 words with the lack of 2 letters. What would have happened if she did not want to become a mother? There are people who exist in the world who are married but simply lack the interest to bear children. There is a severe pressure put on women to have children, and in Joshada's instance, this pressure was put on her from the moment she was born. In her society, it is obvious that she did not have a choice to become anything other than a mother. She was only used to reproduce and create more children, and was not allowed to be anything more than that. There are, of course, mothers in modern America today who do take on motherhood as a full-time job, but in the life of Joshada, she had no other option. Everyone around her is seen as a goddess-like figure, referring to her as Blessed Mother. Her husband not only sees her just as a mother, but sexualizes her appearance in every way possible, specifically referring to her breasts. He thinks of her not for her personality or caring nature, but of his imminent pleasure in tasting paradise at the thought of his wife's large round breasts. To him, even though she has blessed him with children, he only sees her as an object, something that he can use in order for a fulfillment of pleasure. Typically, when women are sexualized or thought of as objects, people will only think of a portion of a woman's body, completely disregarding who that woman is as a person. This type of mindset is exactly the type that Kangalacharjun has towards Joshada. When she realizes that this is all he finds appealing towards her, she begins to think of her the same of herself. After a while, she learns that she has fallen ill as a doctor tells her she has breast cancer. After bearing that many children her whole life, she would have no longer been able to feed her children from her breasts anymore because they are cancerous. She could have received treatment from a doctor but refused to get treated at all and refused to go to a hospital. She was in severe pain, and everyone around her realized that, frustrated with her for not wanting to get treatment. This was her way of standing up to her society. Her death was possibly the one thing she had control over. She chose not to receive treatment, a choice that she was able to make for herself. In a way, it was her way of being free because sometimes the sting of staying alive is worse than death. She had been controlled her entire life from birth. She was forced into a role she never necessarily asked for by refusing to receive treatment. It was her way of liberating herself, even as painful as it might have been. By letting the cancer destroy her breasts, she destroyed the part of her life that was seen as a mother, the part of her that was seen as a sexist, stereotypical mother in India. In this case, death truly did liberate her. In conclusion, Fefalafi and Joshada were forced into the roles of wife and mother. They had no other option to be anything else in their lives. Fefalafi was controlled by Fumbatha, claiming she did not need to make her own choices in her life because he was there to make them for her, ultimately leading her to break out of the stereotype by committing suicide. Similarly, because Joshada believed her breasts were the only thing that nourished life she created, she saw them as sexualized possessions. Once she found out she had cancer, every reason she had for being on this earth for had vanished. She died alone, just as she had felt her whole life, even while replenishing the earth with children. However, by refusing treatment, she defied the stereotypes of being a woman, liberating herself of the patriarchal society. So death truly does liberate us all. In Fefalafi and Joshada's case, it was the one choice they made that truly led them to their freedom.